There is a specific kind of discomfort the avoidant carries that rarely gets named directly, not the discomfort of the alarm firing, not the discomfort of genuine attachment producing vulnerability, not even the discomfort of the gray that settles when distance has been created from something real. This discomfort is different. Is the specific quiet sits in the chest quality of someone who has behaved in a way that, when held against the mirror of another person's genuine maturity, reveals something about themselves they would prefer not to see. You did not do anything dramatic to produce this, did not confront them, did not deliver a speech about emotional unavailability or attachment theory or what their behavior has cost, did not make a scene or issue ultimatums or perform the kind of visible distress that would give the avoidant something to respond to or defend against. You simply handled yourself with a quality of genuine dignity that made the contrast visible. And the contrast is what produced the embarrassment, what the contrast actually revealed. The avoidant has a self-image, not a grandiose one necessarily. The avoidant is not typically given to obvious arrogance, but a specific functioning self-image that the self-sufficiency architecture supports, the image of someone who is clear-headed, who knows what they need and acts accordingly, who navigates their own interior with competence, who is, in the fundamental sense, an adult in full possession of themselves. This self-image has been largely sustainable, has been supported by the general landscape of the avoidant's life, the professional competence, the social functioning, the specific, reliable quality of someone who handles what needs to be handled without visible difficulty. And then there is the way they have been in relation to you, the withdrawal without explanation, the warmth that came and then receded without acknowledgement of the receding, the distance that was created through behavior rather than through honest conversation, the claiming that happened in the interior while the exterior maintained the managed presentation of someone who was simply not that invested, the pursuit that arrived at the moment of your genuine indifference, the system responding to scarcity rather than the person making a conscious, adult choice. Held against the specific, clear, grounded quality of how you have handled yourself, the genuine processing, the honest grief, the real work of the interval, the actual building of a life that is genuinely yours, the avoidance behavior looks like what it is. Immature, not cruel, not malicious, not the behavior of someone who is a bad person. The behavior of someone whose emotional development in the specific domain of intimate relationship did not keep pace with their development in every other domain, who can handle almost everything with competence and handles this, the specific, vulnerable, requires genuine emotional presence domain of intimate attachment with the tools of a much younger version of themselves. You made that visible not through accusation, through the simple, honest quality of handling yourself differently, what embarrassment is for the avoidant. Embarrassment is not a simple emotion for the avoidant, is not the straightforward, socially produced discomfort of someone who has done something awkward in public and feels the heat of others' awareness. For the avoidant whose self-image is built significantly around competence and self-sufficiency, the specific embarrassment of having behaved immaturely in intimate relationship touches something foundational, touches the gap between who they present themselves as and who they have actually been in the specific domain where the self-sufficient architecture is most inadequate. The self-sufficient architecture is built precisely to prevent this kind of exposure, is designed to keep the interior private, to manage the presentation, to prevent the specific visibility of emotional immaturity that genuine intimate relationship always eventually produces in the avoidant. The architecture has functioned in most domains adequately enough that the exposure has been limited. But you saw not because you were looking for inadequacy, because you were paying the specific, clear-eyed, genuinely attentive quality of attention that genuine care produces, because you were present enough and perceptive enough to see the gap between the presented competence and the actual behavior in the intimate domain. And the seeing your clear, honest, non-judgmental, but also non-pretending awareness of what has been happening is what produced the embarrassment, not shame in the global, I am a bad person sense. The specific, located, this particular gap has been seen discomfort of someone who knows that another person's accurate perception has landed. Why your maturity specifically produced this? Not everyone's maturity would have produced this in the avoidant. The specific embarrassment requires the specific contrast. If you had responded to the avoidance behavior with the matching immaturity that the dynamic can sometimes produce, the desperate reaching, the emotional flooding, the loss of self in the pursuit of connection, the contrast would not have been visible in the same way. The avoidance emotional immaturity in the intimate domain would have been surrounded by enough similar behavior that the gap between the self-image and the reality would have been less starkly visible. but you did not respond with matching immaturity. Responded with the specific, earned, genuine quality of someone who has done real work on their own interior. Who grieved honestly rather than dramatically, who built genuinely rather than performatively, who arrived at genuine indifference through genuine work rather than through strategic distance, who has, in the full and honest sense, handled themselves with a maturity that is real rather than performed. That genuine maturity is what created the contrast. Is what made the gap between the avoidant self-image and their actual behavior in this domain visible in the specific way that produces genuine embarrassment rather than simple discomfort. You were more adult about this than they were, not as a judgment, as the honest, visible, cannot be looked away from fact of how two people navigated the same situation. And the avoidant, who values competence and self-possession and the specific quality of knowing themselves and acting accordingly, cannot entirely avoid the awareness of what the contrast reveals, what the embarrassment does in them. Embarrassment in the avoidant does not express itself the way embarrassment expresses itself in people with more emotional fluency. Does not arrive as visible contrition or direct acknowledgement or the specific exposed quality of someone who is openly processing what they are feeling. It goes inward, gets managed, gets converted through the management protocol into something that can be lived with more comfortably than raw embarrassment allows. It gets converted into defensiveness that is not expressed. The internal narrative that would reframe the behavior, that would find the version of events in which the avoidance behavior was reasonable, understandable, perhaps even correct given the specific circumstances, gets constructed and deployed internally even when it is not deployed externally. The avoidant arguing with their own embarrassment rather than expressing it. It gets converted into increased distance sometimes, the specific quality of someone who has been seen more clearly than is comfortable and responds to the seeing by creating space from the person who did the seeing, not because they are angry at you, because proximity to someone who sees the gap between the self-image and the reality is uncomfortable in a way that distance temporarily reduces. It gets converted into the quiet, private, unacknowledged accumulation of something that does not have a clean name. The specific interior discomfort of knowing, without being able to fully defend against the knowing, that they were less than they present themselves as being in the domain that matters, what it means that they are embarrassed. The embarrassment means the gap has been registered. Not in the analytical, framework applying, I now understand my attachment style sense. In the direct, felt this is what my behavior looks like against the contrast of genuine maturity sense. That registration is significant, is the specific kind of honest self-confrontation that the management protocol works consistently to prevent. And it's having happened, it's having gotten through the management protocol far enough to produce genuine embarrassment rather than simply being managed into the preferred narrative, means something has reached the avoidant that the usual management tools could not fully address. Whether the embarrassment produces anything useful is a separate question. Embarrassment that is managed back into defensiveness produces nothing useful. Embarrassment that is metabolized honestly, that is allowed to be the honest feedback it is, about the gap between the self-image and the actual behavior in intimate relationship, can produce the beginning of genuine self-examination. That self-examination is the prerequisite for everything that genuine change requires, is not the change itself, is the honest starting point from which genuine change becomes possible, what you did not do to produce this. Worth naming clearly because it clarifies what the embarrassment is actually about. You did not lecture them, did not deliver a thorough accounting of their emotional immaturity, did not provide the psychological framework that would have allowed the avoidant to intellectualize the embarrassment rather than feel it, did not make a speech about attachment theory or avoidant psychology or what the pattern has cost. You simply lived differently than they did in the same situation. That is all, and that is everything. The embarrassment was produced not by your words but by the visible quality of how you handled something genuinely difficult, by the specific contrast between the dignity of your genuine processing and the immaturity of their managed avoidance, by the simple, honest, inescapable fact that you were more fully present in your own experience than they were in theirs. That contrast is not something you constructed, is the natural, honest result of two people navigating the same situation with different levels of emotional development in the intimate domain. You did not make them look immature by calling them immature. You made them look immature by being mature, and the difference between those two things is the whole of what this is about. What you do with this knowledge. Nothing punishing, nothing that uses the embarrassment as leverage, nothing that exploits the visibility of the gap for any strategic purpose. The knowledge that the avoidant is embarrassed by the contrast between their behavior and yours is useful primarily as confirmation of something already understood, that the dynamic has been seen clearly by both people. That the clarity is not only yours, that your honest, grounded, genuine maturity has produced enough honest self-confrontation in the avoidant that even they, through the management protocol's best efforts, cannot entirely avoid the awareness of what the contrast revealed. That confirmation is worth having, is the final piece of the honest picture. The avoidant knows in the private, managed, will not be easily expressed interior that you handled this better than they did, that the maturity was yours and the immaturity was theirs, that the contrast, however uncomfortable to hold, is accurate, and your life, the genuine, built, actually inhabited life that produced the maturity that produced the embarrassment, continues. Requires no adjustment based on the avoidance embarrassment, does not need the acknowledgement of the embarrassment to validate what was built, is simply, genuinely, completely yours. The avoidant is embarrassed because you made them look immature. You made them look immature by becoming genuinely mature. That maturity is yours to keep, not as a trophy. As the honest, daily, shows up in how you live expression of someone who has done real work and arrived somewhere real, that somewhere is worth staying in, completely. What emotional maturity in intimate relationship actually consists of. The contrast that produced the embarrassment was not accidental, was the result of specific, concrete differences in how two people navigated the same situation. Understanding what those differences actually consist of, what emotional maturity in intimate relationship actually looks like in practice, is worth examining honestly, not to celebrate it, but to understand what produced the contrast. Emotional maturity in intimate relationship is not the absence of feeling. Is not the composed, unaffected quality of someone who processes everything quickly and moves on without difficulty. Is not even the admirable absence of neediness that is sometimes mistaken for maturity. It is the capacity to feel fully and behave responsibly simultaneously. The specific difficult requires real development ability to have genuine emotional responses to difficult situations, to feel the hurt, the grief, the confusion, the longing, without allowing those feelings to entirely determine the behavior. To be moved without being swept away, to be affected without losing the thread of who you are and what you value. This capacity is developed. Not inherited, not distributed randomly as a feature of personality, built through the specific, unglamorous, requires real investment work of attending honestly to one's own interior over time. Through the repeated, daily, small moment practice of feeling something and asking honestly what the feeling is and what it is actually asking for. Through the accumulated experience of navigating difficult situations without the immediate conversion of the difficulty into behavior that prioritizes short-term relief over genuine integrity. The avoidant's emotional immaturity in intimate relationship is specific, is not global. The avoidant handles many things with genuine competence and genuine emotional regulation. Is located in the specific domain of genuine attachment. Is the place where the management protocol takes over because the genuine emotional development that would handle the situation differently was arrested or bypassed when the wound was installed. The wound was installed before the development could continue. Before the child who would eventually become the avoidant had developed the specific capacity to feel genuine attachment without converting it into threat assessment. The development stopped in this domain at the point where genuine attachment started to feel like what the wound had taught it would feel like. And the management protocol was installed to compensate for the arrested development, to handle the intimate domain through tools that were never designed for it. Your maturity made the arrested development visible, not by pointing at it, by being genuinely further along. The specific things you did that revealed the contrast. Not things you planned. Things that were simply the natural expression of where you actually are in your own development. You grieved without making the grief a weapon. When the hurt arrived and it was real, and the grieving was real, you moved through it with the specific, honest quality of someone who allows the grief to be what it is without deploying it as leverage. Without the specific, immature form of grief that is really an attempt to produce guilt in the person who caused the hurt. Without the flooding that uses genuine pain to assert the magnitude of the investment in the hope of producing reciprocal investment. The grief was simply grief, real, honest, moved through rather than managed into something that served a strategic purpose. And the avoidant, who has witnessed many expressions of grief in the context of their intimate relationships, recognized the difference between grief as weapon and grief as genuine processing, even if the recognizing produced discomfort rather than clear articulation. You did not require their acknowledgement to know what was real. The specific, genuinely mature quality of someone who trusts their own perception sufficiently that the absence of external confirmation does not destabilize the perception. who knows what the connection was and what it cost and what was real in it, without needing the avoidance acknowledgement of those things to maintain the knowing. The avoidance behavior, the managed distance, the narrative construction, the retroactive minimization of the connection's significance is, among other things, an implicit invitation to doubt your own perception, to accept the smaller version of what was between you, to revise the accurate picture in the direction of the avoidant's more comfortable narrative. You did not accept the invitation. Maintain the accurate picture without requiring the avoidant to confirm it, and the maintenance of accurate self-perception in the face of implicit pressure to revise it downward is a specific, genuine quality of emotional maturity that the avoidant, whose self-image includes accurate self-perception, cannot easily dismiss. You built something real in the interval, not as performance. As the genuine, for its own sake, investment in the life that is actually yours. And the building, the specific, visible, shows up in the quality of your presence, quality of someone who has been genuinely somewhere, is perhaps the most concrete expression of the maturity that produced the contrast. Because building genuinely during the specific difficulty of the interval requires the emotional maturity to redirect genuine investment toward what is actually available rather than toward what was hoped for, requires the capacity to grieve what was not available while simultaneously investing genuinely in what is. Requires the specific, difficult, genuine development level maturity of someone who can hold both the loss and the building simultaneously without allowing either to cancel the other. The avoidant watching this or knowing it in the peripheral doesn't require direct observation, way the avoidant knows things about your state, sees the contrast with their own behavior in the same interval. The managed distance, the productivity that stayed ahead of the feeling rather than the genuine building of something real. The self-sufficiency performance rather than the genuine, curious, honest engagement with what the interval was actually asking. Why the avoidant cannot easily dismiss the embarrassment. The management protocol is sophisticated and effective at managing many forms of discomfort, can construct narratives that reframe almost any difficult interior experience into something more comfortable, can produce the specific, revised version of events that allows the preferred self-image to remain intact in the face of contradictory evidence. The embarrassment produced by the contrast with your genuine maturity is more difficult to manage than most things the protocol addresses, for a specific reason. It is not based on accusation, is not based on your assessment of the avoidant's behavior, is not the result of anything you said that they can argue with or reframe or construct a counter-narrative around. It is based on what they can see directly, on the observable, undeniable, concrete quality of how you have handled yourself. On the visible gap between the self-image of someone who is clear-headed and self-aware and emotionally competent and the actual behavior in the intimate domain that the contrast reveals. Narratives can be constructed to counter accusations. Counter-narratives are much harder to construct against visible contrast, because the visible contrast is not a claim you are making about them. It's simply the reality of how two people navigated the same situation. And arguing with reality requires more effort and produces less stability than arguing with a claim. The avoidant cannot easily say you are wrong about them being immature because you have not said they are immature. The embarrassment is their own recognition of what the contrast reveals. Is their own assessment arriving from inside rather than being delivered from outside, and their own assessments arriving from inside are significantly harder for the management protocol to successfully manage than assessments that arrive from outside and can be defended against. What the embarrassment asks of them. Not anything comfortable. The honest answer to what the embarrassment asks of the avoidant is one of the more demanding things available. It asks for honest self-examination in the specific domain where the management protocol has been most consistently operational, the domain of intimate attachment, the place where the arrested development lives. The specific, difficult, requires real-work territory of honest engagement with why the intimate domain has been handled so differently from every other domain. This is not an intellectual exercise, is not the analytical framework applying "I now understand my attachment style" engagement that the avoidant's cognitive sophistication makes relatively easy. Is the embodied uncomfortable, this is what I actually did and what it actually cost engagement with the specific behavior rather than the category of behavior. Not avoidant attachment produced these behaviors. I produced these behaviors in response to this specific person who deserved better. And the why of it, the real why, traced honestly to the wound rather than to the comfortable narrative of genuine incompatibility or necessary self-protection, is available if I am willing to look. The embarrassment is asking for the looking, not demanding it, not guaranteeing that the looking will happen. simply creating the interior conditions in which the looking becomes harder to avoid than the not looking. Whether the avoidant does the looking, and what they do with what they find if they do, is entirely theirs to determine. Cannot be produced by your maturity or your patience or the quality of the contrast you created. Can only arise from their own honest engagement with the discomfort the contrast produced. What this moment represents in the dynamics arc. Across the full arc of the dynamic, from the original falling that happened before either of you fully understood what was happening, through the push and pull, through the staying away in the gray and the final trick of the pursuit, this moment represents something specific. The point at which the dynamic has produced its most honest accounting. Not the most comfortable, not the most resolved, the most honest. The point at which both people are in the most genuinely truthful relationship to what has actually happened between them. The avoidant knows with the specific clarity that genuine embarrassment produces what their behavior has been and what it looks like against the contrast of your genuine maturity. That knowing is honest. Is not managed into the preferred narrative, is simply the honest picture held privately, producing the specific discomfort of genuine self-confrontation. You know with the specific clarity that genuine work has produced, what the dynamic was and what it cost and what you built in its aftermath and where you actually are now. That knowing is also honest. Is the product of genuine processing rather than managed narrative, is simply the accurate picture held clearly, not requiring external confirmation to remain accurate. Two people, both holding honest pictures, both in the most truthful relationship to what has actually happened that the dynamic has yet produced. This is the most potentially generative moment the dynamic has created. Not the most comfortable, the most honest, and honest moments are the only ones from which genuine change in either person can actually begin. What genuine change looks like from here. For the avoidant, genuine change from this moment of embarrassment requires the specific, concrete, behavioral, not just interior work that has been described throughout this body of work. The therapeutic engagement, the pattern-level work, the specific practice of staying when the alarm fires rather than creating distance. The development, slow and nonlinear, of the capacity to sustain in the intimate domain the competence that is already present in every other domain. The embarrassment is a genuinely useful starting point for this work. Is among the most honest motivations available. Is the specific, felt, this is what my behavior actually looks like confrontation with the gap between the self-image and the intimate behavior that is more likely to produce genuine motivation than the abstract understanding of attachment theory. But the embarrassment as a motivator requires something from the avoidant that the embarrassment itself does not supply. The willingness to remain in the discomfort long enough for it to do its motivating work rather than managing it back into the defensive narrative that makes it bearable. That willingness is entirely theirs. For you, genuine change from this moment is already substantially accomplished, is already visible in the contrast that produced the embarrassment, in the genuine maturity you have developed, in the life you have built, in the clear-eyed, grounded, actually yours quality of where you are now. What genuine change looks like from here, for you, is not further transformation. Is the continued daily for its own sake inhabiting of what has been built, the continued genuine investment in the life that is actually yours, the continued bringing of the full, honest, uncalibrated self to every encounter without organizing the self bringing around the avoidance comfort or response. That continuation is not dramatic, does not announce itself, does not feel like the significant thing it is while it is being done, is simply the ordinary, unremarkable, shows up in the quality of Tuesday expression of someone who has genuinely arrived somewhere and continues to inhabit where they have arrived. What you owe the embarrassment. Nothing strategic, nothing punishing, nothing that uses the visibility of the gap as leverage for anything. The honest answer to what you owe the embarrassment is simple and worth stating plainly. You owe it acknowledgement, not to the avoidant, not the direct acknowledgement of a conversation about their embarrassment or a naming of the gap or anything that would externalize what is and should remain their own interior reckoning. But in your own honest interior, the acknowledgement that the contrast was real, that what you built was real, that the maturity that produced the contrast was earned rather than performed, that the embarrassment it produced in them is the honest response to genuine contrast rather than manufactured comparison. That acknowledgement is simply the honest reception of accurate information. The information that where you are is genuinely further along in this specific domain, in the specific development of genuine emotional maturity in intimate relationship, than where they are, not as superiority, as the honest accounting of what the work has produced, and then you owe the embarrassment nothing more. Does not need to be managed or used or addressed or offered back to the avoidant in any form. is theirs, lives in their interior, is their honest confrontation with their own behavior. Your life, the genuine, built, actually inhabited life that produced the maturity, that produced the embarrassment, continues, requires no adjustment based on the avoidance embarrassment. Is not waiting for the embarrassment to produce something useful in the avoidant before it can continue to be what it is. It is simply, genuinely, completely yours, already mature enough to have produced the contrast, already real enough to be worth continuing to inhabit fully. The honest summary. The avoidant is embarrassed because you made them look immature. That is real. Is the honest consequence of the genuine contrast between where you have arrived and where they have been in the same situation. The embarrassment was not your goal, was not the point of the work you did, was the natural, honest, cannot be helped consequence of two people being in genuinely different places in the development of emotional maturity in the intimate domain. You did not set out to produce their embarrassment, set out to handle yourself with genuine dignity in a genuinely difficult situation. The embarrassment was the byproduct of the dignity, meeting the immaturity in the specific way that genuine contrast always produces honest visibility. What the embarrassment means for what comes next is genuinely uncertain. Depends on what the avoidant does with the honest self-confrontation it has produced, whether it becomes the beginning of genuine self-examination, whether the self-examination becomes the beginning of genuine work, whether the genuine work becomes the beginning of genuine change. All of that is theirs to determine. Yours is already determined, already happened. Is the life you have built in the maturity that produced the contrast and the genuine, grounded, completely yours quality of where you actually are? That is not a small thing, is in fact everything that the work was building toward, and it continues. Now, in the ordinary, unglamorous, completely real hours of a life that is genuinely yours. What the maturity actually cost. The maturity that made the contrast visible was not achieved painlessly, was not the natural, effortless expression of someone who is always going to handle this well, was built through the specific, real, cost-something genuine process of navigating something difficult with more honesty than it was comfortable to bring. The grief that was allowed to be genuine grief rather than weaponized hurt, that required the willingness to feel the hurt fully without the specific relief that converting it into leverage would have provided. Grief without leverage is more painful in the immediate term than grief deployed strategically. The strategic version at least feels like action. The genuine version simply hurts and has to be moved through without the distraction of what it might produce in someone else. The accurate self-perception maintained without external confirmation that required the ongoing, daily, sometimes exhausting work of trusting your own perception in the face of implicit and explicit pressure to revise it downward. When the avoidance behavior suggested the connection was not what you understood it to be, when the managed distance communicated insufficiency, when the retroactive minimization invited you to accept the smaller version, maintaining the accurate picture required the specific effort of someone who has to consciously choose the truth over the more comfortable revision. The genuine building of the interval that required showing up to your own life, even when showing up to the avoidance felt more urgent, required investing genuinely in what was actually available when what was hoped for was not available. Required the specific, demanding, genuinely hard work of redirecting primary investment toward what is actually present when the primary investment wanted to remain organized around what was absent. None of this was free. All of it cost real resources. Real time, real emotional energy, real cognitive and psychological effort that went toward handling something difficult with genuine integrity rather than with the various forms of strategic management that would have been easier in the short term. The maturity is real. The cost of it was also real. And the embarrassment the avoidant is carrying is partly the embarrassment of someone who recognizes that the person they were with paid a real cost for their genuine maturity, while they themselves were paying the much lower cost of avoidance. What the avoidant recognizes about that cost. The avoidant, for all the management protocol's effectiveness, is perceptive. Has the specific, developed quality of attunement to relational environments that was built through years of monitoring those environments for the cost signals the alarm was calibrated to detect. That attunement does not only read the signals of impending cost to themselves, also reads with a clarity that the management protocol cannot entirely prevent the signals of genuine cost being paid by someone else. The avoidant knows what the interval cost you, not because you told them. Because the quality of where you have arrived, the specific, earned, not arrived without cost quality of genuine maturity, is visible to someone whose attunement is as developed as the avoidance, is distinguishable from the performed version, is readable as the real thing, and reading it as the real thing means reading what the real thing required. What it cost to grieve genuinely rather than strategically. What it cost to maintain accurate self-perception under pressure. What it cost to build genuinely in the interval rather than simply managing distance while remaining fundamentally oriented toward the avoidant. The embarrassment contains this recognition. Is partly the specific discomfort of someone who knows that the person they engaged with paid a real cost while they managed the situation with far lower personal expenditure. Who knows that the maturity that produced the contrast was not free while their own avoidance was, in the short term, significantly less costly. That recognition is uncomfortable in a specific way that the management protocol finds difficult to fully address, because it is not abstract, is the specific, concrete, this person specifically recognition of what you paid that they did not, and the specificity prevents the management from making it into something more comfortable than it is. What genuine maturity actually asks of you going forward. Not the maintenance of a position, not the continued demonstration of the maturity that produced the contrast, not the ongoing performance of dignity that would convert the genuine thing into the strategic thing. Simply the continued, genuine, for its own sake inhabiting of where you actually are. Which is genuinely mature in the specific ways described throughout, which handles difficulty with the specific combination of honest feeling and responsible behavior that genuine emotional development produces, which trusts accurate self-perception without requiring external confirmation, which builds genuinely in whatever interval exists between where things are and where they might go. These things do not require effort to maintain if they are genuine. Genuine things do not require the effort of maintenance that performed things require. The genuine maturity is simply the natural expression of where you actually are in your own development, continues not because you are working to continue it, but because it is what you actually are. What going forward asks is not different from what the interval asked. The genuine, honest, for your own sake occupation of your own life, the continued investment in what is actually yours, the continued bringing of the full self to every encounter without organizing the self bringing around the avoidance comfort or embarrassment or what the embarrassment might or might not produce. The avoidance embarrassment is real and it is theirs. Your life is real and it is yours. Both of those things continue, simultaneously, in parallel, independent of each other's trajectory while also, in the specific way that genuine things affect other genuine things, influencing each other simply through the honest quality of their existence. Your genuine maturity influenced the avoidance interior by being genuinely visible, not through strategy, through being genuinely real. Your continued genuine maturity will continue to be genuinely visible, not as a tool, as the simple, honest, ongoing expression of someone who has arrived somewhere real and continues to inhabit what they have arrived at. That continuation is enough. Was always enough is the whole of what the work was building toward and the whole of what forward motion actually consists of, simply being where you are, genuinely, now.